continuing interview series on anti-imperialist America. I'm absolutely honored today to have with me world-renowned revolutionary folk musician and songwriter David Rovics. Rovics has written thousands of songs and a wide variety of topics, ranging from inspiring historical events and figures to exposing the crimes of the imperialists, both Democrats and Republicans alike. How are you today, David?
Great, Dust. Thank you. How are you holding up?
Been cramming for this study that's happening at 8 o'clock here.
Yeah, you have to read 3 books for this event that's coming up?
No, we're just doing it in 4 parts. It's been going on we do about last section was 2.5 hours. We do about 100
That's
pages. We
great.
cover about 100 pages of material.
You really
Today we're
get into
doing
it.
the third international, which is the most exciting.
Great, great.
Other ones, let's see. Hey, greetings, space communists. Thanks for joining us. Okay.
Oh, cool.
So I'll go right into the next question. You've been doing this a while. You have been making folk music about current events and movements for decades. You took part in the anti-globalization movement in the 90s, stood firm against the Iraq War, through Occupy to Black Lives Matter and rent strikes. Tell us your story, a bit of the behind the music. How did you get into revolutionary politics and folk music? Can you tell us some of the experiences you've had through the years?
Oh, that's a big bite to try to chew on there, but the whole thing. I wrote a memoir. I can just boil it down to one sentence, but it's. I think I don't call it folk music though. First of all, I call it just music because folk. It's because these things are about as hard to define as the term communist or something. It's sort of like everybody has their own idea of what it is. So, but it. I mean, the I got into writing songs and playing music I got into playing music as a very small child because my parents are both musicians. I was raised by musicians, not folk musicians or any kind of other related vein, but they were classical musicians, and they are classical musicians. And so music was kind of like in the blood, I guess. And I got into sort of activism, I guess you could say, when I was around 12, and I was very affected by the 3 Mile Island meltdown that happened when I was a kid, and it was definitely a formative period for me to sort of realize that things were really messed up out there, and the adults were not doing a good job of running the show, so, but I didn't start writing songs until I was like in my early 20s, and so it wasn't like all happened. These activities didn't all just go together at once, but they sort of came along the way. But I've been at it a while. That's true. And good stories. I don't know. I mean, all those movements you mentioned, there's definitely good stories in all of them. I mean, it's been a real honor to be able to participate in all of them to one degree or another. And I was especially involved around North America and Europe with the global justice movement, and which is also called the anti-globalization movement. Depends on who you ask what it means, and also the anti-war movement, especially on both sides of the Atlantic, and other movements. But those are the really big global ones that I was very much involved with, singing at a lot of different protests. I mean, singing as many events as I could travel to. It was constant, and they overlapped, and they so it was pretty much a continual period of really a lot of active stuff going on from, I guess, 99 through 2005 was really the overlapping 2 movements on both sides of the Atlantic, and things started cooling down a lot in the U.S. after that. and probably because a Democrat got elected a few years later, and I think when Bush got his second term, a lot of people just became really depressed and lost any sense of optimism. And as Medea Benjamin pointed out to me not long ago, a few weeks ago, that the anti-war movement was largely populated by Democrats, and that's true. I think I don't think that's the only explanation for its demise by late 2005, but that's part of it. It's not a complete answer to your question, but it's the beginning of one anyway.
It's good. It's good. Folks, I guess folks can get on your Patreon, and you're putting out memoirs.
Yeah, I did. It was just one sort of extended effort that I was involved with on and off for a couple of years, which ultimately turned into a 16-part audio memoir with songs, and it's pretty much the only thing that is if people who sign up to support me on Patreon. I mean, most everything I post on Patreon is free and open to the public, but the memoir isn't. So that's my one effort at exclusive offering, but it's good, I think. And I think it's I spent a lot of time working on it. I think it's fairly well put together, but it's I think it's also only something that only hardcore fans would be interested in reading generally, or seem to be interested. Maybe because it's sort of on the other side of a paywall, so I don't know how popular it might be if it were
So it's
as
audio
freely available. Yeah, it's audio. I mean, I did write it out. It's all written, but I'm the only one who has that version of it. It's in audio form, and it's all sort of annotated with songs. It includes 100 songs.
Cool. I think we'll go to the next question. Let's see. You are carrying on the legacy of suppressed history of resistance in this country, from Joe Hill and the IWW to Woody Guthrie and the Popular Front, appealing to the better sentiments in the working class to promote social understanding and change. Can you tell us a little bit about this history and how you see your role in it?
Yeah, I think the whole history of music as a form of popular education, and you mentioned all those different people and group and networks, and basically, I mean, music has this role in all of those social movements as an important form of popular education, and also as an important form of community building, and fostering a sense of community and solidarity and morale building. And it serves these multiple purposes because of the nature of music, because of the nature of this form of communication, which is which affects people emotionally, and this has been studied scientifically. So I can talk about this in a really factual kind of way, because we know that songs, words when sung go straight to the emotional centers of the brain, and they get processed differently. So they are very powerful, and songs and music has been widely recognized as a very powerful tool for social movements, as well as for governments, corporations, and militaries over the course of many thousands of years. It's well documented that soldiers sing songs as they go into battle, and this is one of the main things that prevent them from running in the other direction, and the same was true of the civil rights marchers and so many other people in lots of different situations. But the music has played this role for a very long time, and it's the music industry that came along in the late 19th century that's still with us today in a sort of shrunken form compared to what it was 20 years ago. But the music industry that has been around all this for the past 1.5 centuries or so has been explicitly interested in dividing and propagandizing and maintaining white supremacy. It is a racist institution at its core. The mainstream music industry. I'm not talking about the indie labels and stuff, but the mainstay of the music industry in the United States has been a tool of the racist and white supremacist elite since its inception. And I think this is not widely understood, but but that's what it is, and that's what, and it's a tool for propaganda, and it's very political, and it's also very profitable. But music has been used that way by the music industry as a tool of segregation and keeping people apart, and as they're promoting black music into the white community at the same time. It's very complicated, but it is a tool of the white supremacist elite in this society, and has been since the late 19th century. But so for a lot of people who aren't familiar with the grassroots music traditions, the folk music traditions, the folk with a small f, that not what a lot of people think of as folk music, which is like a white guy from the city playing a guitar, but folk music in the broad sense, which is not how people usually use the term, but folk music meaning anything other than classical music, anything that's within the oral tradition, which is everything other than classical music, basically. So it's that's that tradition has been political forever, which is not to say that the folk tradition is obsessed with writing, with people singing songs that are what we might call political, but a large percentage of the songs in the history of music from around the world, that when we're not talking about the music industry, but just what people write and what people collect in songbooks and that sort of thing throughout the ages, you look at it and you find that while love, lost, and found has always been a popular subject, just as it is in pop music circles today in every genre, there have been other subjects that we would now consider really, protest music or novelty music or something very marginal. And it's not like it was popular just at certain times going through phases. It's always been popular. And as long as people have been writing and recording songs, there have been songs about avoiding military conscription, songs about getting attacked by the authorities and beaten by police, defending yourself from being attacked by authorities, uprisings, disasters in workplace disasters, union organizing, since unions have been around. I mean, these kinds of themes have been around since as long as people have been writing anything down or recording anything that we, of course, most of it's not recorded. Most of it's lost to history, but some of the earliest songs that we know of in the English language were about chopping the heads off of the king, chopping the king's head off. That's the earliest song that I know of. I think around the time of Chaucer, during the time of Watts Rebellion in the 14th century. It was called the Cuddy Wren. It's one of the earliest folk songs we know of, and it's about cutting the king's head off. So it's the tradition is long and important and very hidden when it comes to the history books and the pop music industry and how they portray history and reality, which has very little to do with actual history.
Right on. A great answer.
Thank you.
Moving right along. We'll go to. You actually started putting out a. Don't know if I had the sticker. You put out a podcast this week with David Rovics, and it's on a variety of subjects, from how to make it in the music industry in the days of Spotify to important ideological struggle. And one of those, in my opinion, is your podcast of Triggers and Bullets. I was wondering, where I believe you expose the failures of the Democrats as part of the rise of Trump. Is there a way you can expand a little bit on these ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the things that everybody, I mean, since the rise of Trump, it's not the first time that people have been talking about the rise of fascism and the relationship between an American ruler and a certain German ruler in the 1930s or an Italian ruler in the 1920s. I mean, these comparisons are often made and perhaps often made inappropriately, and perhaps like there's a lot of Democrat types who just want to cry wolf every time there's a Republican in power, and vice versa. The Republicans, when there's a Democrat in power, there's many people in the grassroots of the Republican base who are afraid that that they're going to get all their guns taken away and sent to concentration camps. I mean, the fear goes both ways in many different directions. But I think all that aside, I think there's a lot of parallels between Trump's rise to power and both Mussolini's rise to power and Hitler's rise to power. And to also, we can easily add Modi in there and Bolsonaro in there as well. And I think in all these cases, they follow a similar trajectory in terms of their rise to power. Of course, there's also massive differences, but the similar trajectory that I think that anybody looking at this recent history, or in the case of Hitler and Mussolini, less recent history, what you'll find, and these are just some examples, and there's loads of other examples, but what you'll find with the rise of fascist despots, or neo-fascist despots, or whatever we want to call them, they often follow a trajectory where they come to power out of the ashes, in some sense, of a society that was basically impoverished through the misrule by people who were either self-identified, or were identified by society or the media as being coming from the left, or the social democrats, or whatever variety of left we want to categorize them. But we have to those of us who may occupy a space that we think of as actually authentically left, who don't think of the Democratic Party as left, have to remember that CNN calls them the left, right? So I mean, the Democrats are the left in the minds of the mainstream media and in the minds of many Americans. And so, despite the fact that, as you and I are well aware, the Democratic Party is a neoliberal imperialist institution that rules on behalf of the banks and the arms companies and the oil companies, that's not how they're viewed by a lot of other people in society. They're viewed as being sort of, our best effort at some kind of social democracy. And then they see the cost of housing double under the Obama administration, and they think, the left has failed. And whether that's really the failure of the left or the failure of neoliberalism, but the way it's viewed is it's the same phenomenon that you have with the Congress Party's rule in India, or with the Workers' Party in Brazil, where, although of course, I would say certainly the Workers' Party did a lot of good for a lot of people in Brazil, it did not, there's a lot of problems in Brazil having to do with poverty and corruption that that are structurally built into global relations, and are for a variety of reasons very difficult to overcome. So to whatever extent the Workers' Party was not able to overcome that all those problems in Brazilian society, which is a hugely problem-ridden society with incredible stratification of wealth, like the United States, but even worse. Those problems were not overcome by the Workers' Party, and that's the kind of atmosphere that can give rise to people like Bolsonaro being elected. And so the fascists often are grown out of the soil of failed social democracies, and that's what we need to understand about what's going on now, and about history, and about Modi and Bolsonaro, and very much Trump.
Right on. Shout out to Arctic Angel, and good morning in Australia, David Fox. What David Rovics just described is very much what we're studying in the Third International, which is the failure of the Social Democrats and the rise of a fascist, Hitler. Not giving the people what they need, they turn to something else. The instability, the capital. I mean, it's it's also, that's not usually something you would hear from a singer to get that in depth. But you go there with your politics and the history, and it's it's inspiring. I guess I'll move on to the next question. Let's see. I noticed you're doing interviews, open mics, podcasts, children music, and a number of positive projects recently in the current period. Can you tell us of your work in the current period?
Yeah, the children's music I started doing. I mean, I did two children's albums when my first child was born, and basically from the time that she was born until she was 2, I only wrote one song for adults, I think, during that period. Which was called Democrats Make Me Want to Vomit. I wrote while waiting in line for a ferry. But but otherwise I only wrote children's songs. My mind just couldn't go anywhere other than that realm. It was very worrying because I'd never get gigs for kids. So I was like, oh no, what's going to happen to my career, you know? But then that sort of ended as quickly as it started, and I got 2 good children's albums out of that, and then I haven't written another children's song since. And since when the pandemic hit, I basically had to cancel tours in 9 countries, and I started doing live streaming 5 days a week. There was a few weeks where I was just writing a lot of songs about the pandemic and completely losing any sense of time and feeling just stressed by the whole unpredictability of everything. Although I was also looking forward to the uprising that was obviously going to be coming. I didn't know what it was going to be, you know, what was going to trigger it exactly, but the powder keg was certainly a powder keg, and that was obvious. But, you know, I didn't know what was going to come of it. But the unpredictability of the whole reality of life for an unemployed musician, I just started to live stream for my mental health largely. And so that's basically, it's just, just recording interviews with people that I already know for the most part, that I might be seeing if I were still touring, who I'd be actually hanging out with. Because when I'm home, I have 3 kids, and other than talking with my wife, I really rarely talk with adults when I'm home. So, which is fine normally, except when you're not touring and you're never, you know. So then I was like, okay, I have to artificially engineer conversations with adults, because otherwise I'm going to lose my marbles. And so basically every morning I spend an hour talking with an adult, you know, who I'm interviewing for this live show. But, you know, I don't really care how many listeners we have, because I'd be doing it, you know, I'm doing it for my mental health anyway. And we were getting a few hundred people watching most of the broadcasts, so it's fine. I mean, at the same time, I'd love to have a huge audience, but you know, it's okay. Everybody else is live streaming, so I shouldn't expect more than a few hundred people to tune into mine.
Right on. Let's see.
And the podcasts were just like, you know, just trying to cover all the bases in terms of like when I'm producing. I started the podcast before I started getting into live streaming, and I avoided live streaming for years because it's so hard to deal with the quality issues, you know, in terms of doing music. You know, I figured that stuff out pretty well over the past few months, as have many other people. And I just turned the live streams into podcasts, because I already had a podcast that I was doing, you know, which was more like weekly or less than weekly for years. But now it's, you know, more like every day. Even because I'm putting the interviews into the podcast, you know, into podcast form after I live stream them, because that's what you do.
Right on. Let's see. All right. I'm going to tell my story about how I was introduced to your music. I was among comrades at a party in Boston, and we were taking turns. This was at least 10 years ago. I don't at least 10 years ago. I was at a party in Boston amongst comrades, and we were taking turns playing music on YouTube, going back and forth. And I played a song from Rebel Diaz, "Which Side Are You On?"
Right.
It's a bit dated now. It was a pretty revolutionary.
Originally, it's from 1932.
No. Yeah, 32. The intro, "Which Side Are You On?" But Rebel Diaz's version is a hip hop version from like 2000s, early
Cool.
or later
Did
2000s.
they use the same kind of chorus, like
Yeah,
which
yeah,
side are you on? They did.
yeah,
So it's
yeah.
a riff
That's
off
right.
of that one. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
I
And
love
so
Rebel.
the
Yeah.
next person in response to that played your song. The person who played it was Latina or Rasa woman who was married to an Irish guy, and she played the song St. Patrick's Battalion, and that song just amazed me. That's probably a lot of people's first song. That's
For
one of your
me,
more
yeah, that's what they
yeah,
hear
one of your
first for
popular
sure.
songs. And I was just like, wow! Not only is that an inspiring historical event I have never heard of, but just this I don't know something the simplicity in your voice, the calm, steady rhythm, like it just put me in another place. And I was like, wow, I got to go check out this guy's music, and I wasn't let down. Um, you've laid out like powerful songs. Um, I now I'm a truck driver. I listen to them at night. Um,
I
some of
love the
the
idea that there's a truck driver listening to my music out there on the highway somewhere. It's great.
so if anyone in my audience, if you have never heard a David Rovics song, get immediately onto YouTube and Google David Rovics, because you won't be let down. It's powerful. So especially socialists and communists, a lot of people watching. There's a lot of good stuff in there. Um, you have this sense of humor in some of them. Like let's see, like I'm a better anarchist than you, but and in some stuff that recently,
Mhm.
this interesting sense of
Mhm.
humor, and then uh, you have like political critiques, like was it Vanguard? The song what was I think that was mostly a hit on workers for
Yeah,
the
probably
chant.
originally. I mean, yeah, it was really mainly directed at Workers' World when I wrote it, definitely. And then I just thought I'd include, a whole bunch of other people just to piss them off. I stopped
I
doing that song actually because it really upset some people. And I never, when I write satirical songs, I'm actually just trying to use humor as a tool of levity and communication, and I think it's very important that people enjoy this themselves, and you can't just write depressing ballads all the time, whether or not that's your strength. You have to, I think, I encourage songwriters, try to write funny stuff too. You can't just, even if you're good at writing depressing songs, you can't just hit them with one depressing song after another. And some songwriters who just really suck at writing funny songs, they kind of know it, and they at least include some funny songs of other people in their sets, because you just, but yeah, that one was, I think, I mean, I still think it's a funny song, and some people like it, but I actually lost a lot of gigs in Denmark from the Marxist Leninists as before the party folded, and I
well,
I never meant to upset people quite so much with that song, but certainly some people really like it, especially anarchists like it.
I like the song, and I could at one point I could probably be described as close to that working with people with that, and I think it was a good point about staying principled and close to the masses, and and not getting in a little bubble, you know,
Yeah,
like
good.
I
I
took it
think
as
I think it's a good point.
positive.
Basically, I would
Yeah,
say I still agree with it. Yeah.
yeah. So let's see.
What
What?
surprised me was that I'm a better anarchist than you did not have as the same kind of impact. Like I discovered from, I mean, it
Okay.
may be that communists. I mean, I don't know. People maybe feel really bad about I mean, we're all always on the losing side, communists and anarchists generally. So it's of history. It seems, regardless of the individual battles that may be won, and it's easy to feel demoralized especially when there's not a big movement going on. So I understand how people get a little sensitive, but I was impressed with the fact that I'm a better anarchist than you did not cause the same kind of like backlash from certain corners of the left as Vanguard did. That was interesting, just from a sociological perspective. Yeah, it did piss off a
I
few
was
people
actually
though.
getting in.
Both those songs did.
Okay, I was getting into memories of and building up to say how people could support you, and I got off on that on that rant. I
Oh,
think it was good.
tangents are the best.
Oh, I don't want to go too long because I got that study going on, and
Mm-hmm.
hopefully people watching this can share this out. So if people wanted to hear your music or support you, what would they do, or where would they go?
If they want to hear my music, I make it all freely available on all the streaming platforms. So that's the best way because I don't put out CDs anymore much, because I haven't since, I don't know, 2015, because nobody buys them anymore. But if people want to support me, I have a sort of community supported art project set up, which nowadays people can sign up on patreon.com/David Rovics if they want, or on my website, davidrovics.com, if they click on CSA, which stands for Community Supported Art, then they can also sign up to be patrons then, and they'll receive actual CDs in the mail, as well as my thanks and some exclusive digital offerings. But I mainly just give away all my music like everybody does these days. And, so then people who want to support me can, and that's actually how I survive mainly. But people should know I do not survive through Spotify royalties because they pay really badly, and it's Spotify is like the Uber of of digital music. I mean, they have destroyed so many people's lives, just as Uber has. But it's the same kind of thing where just now you use it because that's what's there. It's like the highways or something. But it's a terrible, terrible corporation. But people can find my music there and very few other places because that's just how it is now.
All right.